welcome to another edition of the Silverbird Selection. Today I'm not going to be reviewing a game, I'm actually going to be reviewing a utility, a music creation program called Ubik's Musik. This was released in about 1986 to 87 in this Firebird sort of gold label packaging for £2.99. We'll take a look at that in more detail in a minute. Ubik, whose name is in the title, was a programmer called Dave Korn, and he programmed a couple of games for the Commodore 64 for Firebird. BMX Kids, Arcade Classics and Thrust 2 were all done by him. This game is very common out there, easy to find on eBay, and my copy cost me £1.84. So let's take a look at Ubik's Musik and see if I can create some music with it. So let's take a look at this Firebird $2.99 packaging in more detail for the first time. So at the top there you can see it says Firebird $2.99. It's got kind of a shield and all this gold imagery around it, very elaborate. Then you've got the main image for the program there, Ubik's Musik, with a guitarist rocking out on his flying V and also someone playing the keyboards in the background, and a very small Firebird logo at the bottom there. So it's quite impressive looking packaging. I think it's nicer looking than the Silver Range packaging that was being done at the time. Otherwise it's quite dull actually. The spine is just black with the logo of the game on, and the back is black as well, so there's no image that wraps around. But it is quite nicely presented. You've got the gold frames around the two screenshots, which as you can see, not very impressive in this case. It's just a keyboard on one of them and a bunch of text on the other. And then for the information about the game, it says, at last the power and capability to turn your Commodore 64 into a truly professional synthesizer. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. Inside the inlay, it's much more familiar looking compared to the other Silver Range releases. So you've got the list of games, pretty comprehensive at this point, which just proves that this range of games in this gold packaging did come out towards the end of the Silver Range era. You've also got the mail order info that you've seen many times before. No instructions inside the inlay on this one because they come in a booklet. There it is, very similar to the other booklets that we've seen. But this one is absolutely chock full. It's 8 pages of instructions, which, as you can see, are in a very, very, very small font. You have to zoom in very closely to actually see it. So just an overview of the game is printed at the top left corner there. Ubik's Musik is a music program for amateur musicians and professional songwriters alike. This is definitely a tool, not a toy, as it has the most powerful capabilities of any program in its range. All you need is a tune in your head to tune your Commodore 64 into a truly professional synthesizer. Then got the loading instructions, then as I say, just reams of information about how to use this program, which I'm not going to go through in any detail. Looking at the instructions, we'll cover the main points of that when the product's loaded. So the game's loading, and this is the loading screen, which is something a bit different to anything else we've seen. It's actually some addendums to the instructions. So as you can see, it says Ubik here to tell you about a couple of things that were added after the instructions were printed. So there's a bit about restarting the editor, and also a bit about if you want to compile a tune and want to have a completed version to occupy another area of memory, there's a program on the tape immediately after the editor to do just that. And it also says have fun. So I think that's actually quite interesting that the instructions had obviously been printed and produced before the program had actually been finished. So when the application's loaded, you're presented with this screen, which I have to say is a very inaccessible way to start things off, especially if you're a novice to this sort of thing like I am. I'll go on the record right now, I'm not much of a musician, I don't really understand musical terminology or theory. I do like the SID chip and the SID tunes, but that's about as far as it goes. I like music, but I don't really know how to create it. So I'm going to do my best for this. I'm going to demonstrate some of the features of it, but definitely not all of them. Just give you an overview of how it works in case you want to have a play around with it yourself. So one of my subscribers, Zor Towers, or Warren as he's also known in real life, did send me an email and mentioned that there's a secret message included in this program, which you can find out by typing in fnord at the prompt here, and it says the Illuminati do not exist, official. So there you go, it's official. According to this at least, the Illuminati do not exist. So anyway, moving on, what you can see on the screen are the 3 channels of the SID chips, clearly denoted at the top of the screen in this grid, and then a number of sequences that have been set up on the 3 tracks for the 3 channels. So navigation around this program is done entirely with the keyboard. There's no joystick as far as I'm aware. and it's done using the cursor keys. Now that immediately presents a little bit of a problem with the Commodore 64, because as those of you who've got a Commodore 64 or had one will know, it only actually has 2 keys for the cursor. So one of them is up and down and the other one is left and right, and you have to hold shift down. So that's down, shift and down is up, if you get what I mean, and same for left and right. So that does make navigating around it a little bit tricky, especially if, like me, you haven't really used the cursor keys on the Commodore 64 for about 30 years or more. Also, a lot of the functionality within the game is done using the function keys, and again they're the same thing. You've got F1 and F2 on the first of the keys, going down to F7 and F8. So F1 you just press the F1, and for F2 you have to do shift and F2. So yeah, there's a few things you have to get your head around before you even start using this program. One thing that is nice and easy though is if you want to start the tune that's currently loaded into memory playing, that's F8, so that's shift and F7. So it's got a number of tunes included that you can play around with a lot of sequences that make those tunes up. So this is just one of them that's loaded in when you first load the program up. There are others to choose from the menu, which we'll get to in due course. So there you go, that's a bit of the music that's come with the program. That's made up from all these sequences that you can see on the screen here. So if we dig into this a little bit further and look at channel 1 and look at one of these sequences, which you do by pressing shift and return, that goes into the actual makeup of the sequence. And as you can see, it's a number of commands. D420 basically means it's the key D. 4 is the octave, I think, that it's in, and then 20 is the duration. So all these numbers, by the way, on the right hand side are hexadecimal numbers, although you wouldn't really be able to see that from any of these examples, but apparently they are hexadecimal, which is probably relates to when you're writing it to memory to use in your own programs. So then you've got voice, which is the different voices of the SID chip you can switch between during the sequence. Cont is continuing the previous note for a period of time. Off presumably switches it off. As I said, I haven't gone through what all these commands mean, but that's a bunch of stuff that basically makes up this particular sequence. Slide, I presume, is sliding a note for a duration of time as well. If we go back to look at one of the others, let's have a look at this one. This is just a load of notes played. So you've got A, B, A, G, B, A, 4 and 5. You can see there for the octave on that C. Hang on a second, let's get back to there. I think again the number is the octave that it's playing at, and they've all got a duration of 4, which probably means that all the notes are basically played for the same amount of time. So there you go, that's the makeup of a sequence within a track. If we just go across and have a look at one of these other ones here, for example the first one in channel 2, that's actually setting the tempo, the voice, and I don't really know what off does, but it does something. So yeah, that's how you build up a track. So it's a bunch of sequences and notes repeated however many times you want to do so. For example, if we move back here, you can see that sequence 2 is repeated 6 times over. All the others in that section are just once each. So that's how you build up your own SID tune in this program across the 3 channels with the sequences and the notes and things within them. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to play around with that a little bit later, but what I'm going to do now is show you the menu, because there is a menu system on here. So lots of options here. You can return to the tune you've just been editing. You can pick a new tune to edit. We'll come back to that later. You can load a tune from the disc or tape. You can save music. You can save voices. We'll get onto those in a minute. You can compile music. You've got a hex converter. So lots of useful tools for the budding music maker or programmer in the mid-80s to create their own tunes and put them in their own products, so demos or games, things like that. So I'm not going to go through a lot of those, because a lot of them are just sort of utility based things rather than actual music making things. The slide rule I've never looked at, but that's basically to create those slides that were shown in the editor that I just showed a few minutes ago. The one thing that is possibly of interest though is the live play and edit voices screen. So let's go to that. So here you can see the representation of the keyboard at the top of the screen. And at the bottom of the screen is the voice editor, which I'm going to do nothing with at all. It's way too complicated. You can see things like effects, vibrato, filters, and all this kind of stuff on there. Fade. I don't know what I'm going to do with all that, so I'm just not going to bother. But the top off, the musical keyboard, is something I can play around with a little bit. So on the left side there, you can see the word TRN and also 3 numbers below it, and you can switch those by pressing J, K and L, and they are the note that's at the lowest end of the keyboard. So this is how you move between octaves on the keyboard, because obviously you can't see them all on this one screen, apparently. Not that I know anything about musical terminology or theory, so I'm just basing it on what I've read in the instructions. So you can switch between them there. It doesn't really matter. I don't know. Let's just try something other. So if you press F8, like on the other screen, that switches the music on, and that allows you to use the keyboard. So for example, if I press T or Y, you can hear the notes. So if we move those octave things around now, that's the same note I'm hitting each time, but you can basically tell that it sounds a bit different. So I'm just going to leave them all on what they were to start with for now. In fact, no, let's just do that, because who really cares? So you can play the keys. If you're in any way talented at playing music, you can play some music on the keyboard using the QWERTY row and also some of the number keys, which I'm terrible at, so I'm not going to mess around with too much. Another thing you can change though is the voices that are used, and you do that by pressing F, G and H, I think. Yeah, so here is the same key. This is the T key. Now let's go with the W, so that's D, the lower D. So that's it with one voice. That's it with another voice, voice 2. There's a good SID music voice there. So yeah, you can switch the voices at will to try the different options. That one's boring. That's got some kind of machine gun noise behind it. Oh, that's got a nice little sort of bouncy noise in the background as well. So you get the idea, switching between the different voices. The 3 different entries, by the way, on the left and right hand side are for the 3 different channels. Not really sure how you switch between just playing one channel or another, but the other functionality you've got in there is to actually play the music that's already loaded into the editor in the background. So if I do Shift and S, I get some of the music from that sequence that we were looking at earlier, from that tune. So I've got a nice sort of bass line sort of thing going on in the background, so then I can play my own music over it. Stuff like that. Again, not very good, not very musical. Let's try switching one of the others on. So this does allow you to hear what's being played on each of the channels of the song that you've currently got loaded in, which I'm not sure you can actually do from the track editor. So just to finish that off, let's have a listen to what channel 3 was doing. You can hear now why I'm not going to be spending too much time trying to compose my own tune. What I'm actually going to do is go back to the track and sequence editor and just make a tune from the stuff that's already available, rather than trying to compose my own, because I don't think your ears could take much more of that. So you've seen a bit of an overview of the live play thing. What I'm not sure you can do is actually play live on the keyboard and save that anywhere. So I guess it's just used for you to work out what notes you want to play, and then you would write them down and then go and put them into the sequence editor. So I feel like there could have been an easier way to actually allow you to build your own tune by actually recording what you're playing there, but apparently you can't do that. So anyway, let's go back to the menu. So what I'm going to do is load in one of the more simple tunes and then play around with it a little bit so you can see how you can modify things more easily than with that tune, which is quite complex and takes quite a long time to run. So if you make a little change to like a couple of notes, you probably wouldn't notice it because of how long and big the tune is. So I'm going to load in a new tune, and I think if I remember rightly, tune 2 is a fairly simple one. There we go. So there's not many sequences within this one, and if I play it, there you go, that's it. So it's just kind of, it sounds like a bit of an end of level tune or starting a new level type tune, something like that. So within this we can hopefully make a few changes and you can hear them immediately by me playing that. So let's go into the very first sequence and have a look what it is. So currently all that's doing is setting the voice to 1. So let's just listen to the tune again. So if I change that to voice 3 and I do that, I can press F1. That will copy the current command that's highlighted into the editor at the bottom. Change that to voice 3 and then I think it's F2 to put it back. There you go, so that's changed voice 1 to voice 3. If I play that now, remember that voice 3 from the live play was one of those nice sort of SID tune noises. You can see the immediate change that's made to the sequence and to the track in general. Okay, so let's then move across and have a look at one of these sequences here. This one seems to get played 6 times over, so let's see what happens in there. Okay, so that's just doing C4, G4, D sharp 4 and C5 once each. So let's just, this might make a right mess of it, well, let's just add a couple of notes in there. So you can do that by, in the editor, you can just literally type what you want to put in. So let's go with another G401. You can just press enter to put that in, and then let's go with another C401, and then finally let's go crazy. Let's do a B3 for 4 because why not? So let's see what change that's made to the tune now. Oh, that made an interesting little bleeping sound at the end of it. So that must have been what that B304 did. So let's try putting that in a little bit earlier as well. So we can do that by, I think, go up here. So let's put that here as well. So if we do, actually what I should have done was copy that with F1 and then you can do F3, I think, to insert it. There we go. So let's see how that sounds now. There you go, so you can see how you can make little changes to it quite easily with one of these smaller tunes. What I'm going to do now is start from scratch basically and try and make my own tune made up of the existing sequences. So to do that we can go back to the menu, we can go to erase current tune, that'll get rid of everything. There we go, so I've got a completely empty tune now. So I'm going to start by putting in, let's just do 01, 01. So that's the first tune, 1 repeat of it. Put that into there. So this is how you can work out exactly what each sequence is doing. So if I just play that straight away. You can see it's just playing some long notes with a bit of slide on. You get the idea. So what I'm also going to do is put a sequence in before that, which is going to be 00, because I think that sets a voice if I remember correctly. So that's currently set to voice 2, but as you know, voice 3 I particularly like, so I'm going to change that to use voice 3 instead. There we go. And now if we play that, sounds a little bit like the beginning of Whiz Ball to me, that. So that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do next is try and add something on channel 2. So let's try sequence 21 just once for now, see what that actually is. Okay, so that did some like little pulsing beep noise, so we probably need to repeat that a bit because it was a very short sequence. So if we were to change the number to 10, let's try that. Okay, so we've got a bit of a pulsing backdrop beat now as well. Probably need to go a bit longer than 10 even. So let's change it again. Let's change it to 30. Let's try and play that again now. Okay, not amazing, but it's built some kind of a tune. So let's then move over to channel 3 and put something in there as well. And this, again, this is total guesswork here, but let's go with something like 41 for, let's just go 5 for the moment. See what happens there. Let's have a look what's in 41 first. Okay, there's a lot going on there. So let's see what happens when we play that. Okay, so that's got a nice, that's got that bassy backdrop now as well. It's coming out pretty cool. So I'm going to carry on and try and compose something reasonably listenable to, and I'll play that when I've done it. You don't need to watch me putting a load of commands in and playing around with it. So let's see what happens. So it's taken me about 40 minutes of messing around, which you'll be glad you didn't have to watch because there's a lot of swearing during that as well because of the control mechanism for moving around this editor. But anyway, I finally composed from the existing sequences and also added a couple of my own, a SID tune. So a couple of things I did was, the first thing was I didn't want 2 of the channels to start until later, so I've put in this huge delay at the beginning of 2 of the channels, which is basically just setting the voice to a particular voice, and then this off actually basically switches the channel off for a period of time. So I've put that in on a couple of them. Another thing I did was midway through here I've introduced a couple of sequences just to change the voice to a different voice. So it's playing the same sequence of notes but with a different voice, basically. Sequence 5 there. Yeah, a couple of other bits and pieces, but there we go. That's most of the pieces. Most of the sequences were already in the system, so all I've done is kind of chain them together. So we've got channel 3 as sort of repetitive bass line, channel 2 is annoying pulsing sounds on its own, but it doesn't sound too bad within the context of the song, and channel 1 is the main tune. So here we go, let's have a listen to it. So I think it's fair to say that the likes of Rob Hubbard and David Whittaker didn't need to worry about my musical abilities, but it was quite an interesting experience to compose a song. Very challenging due to the control mechanism, which I'll get onto in a minute. I wasn't particularly happy with what happened in channel 2, but I just got bored in the end, and that repetitive bleeping sound was kind of good enough. So anyway, that's it for my look at Ubik's Music. So let's move on to the review scores, and obviously some of these don't really apply, some of the categories, to a utility as opposed to a game that I'd normally be reviewing, but here we go anyway. So starting with the packaging, I thought it was pretty nice. That gold style packaging, the $2.99 games, is pretty good. It's the first time we've seen that and I quite like that. It's pretty stylish. And also the instructions were very detailed, although you probably needed a magnifying glass to read them, and I didn't read them all, but those that I did read were very comprehensive. So 7 out of 10 for the packaging. Presentation is fairly average. It's some pretty boring menu screens. Some kind of a user guide within the game might be helpful as well. It's quite hard to navigate and quite inaccessible for novice users such as myself. So I'm going to give the presentation 6 out of 10. Graphics were pretty poor, as you'd expect. It's a utility, it's not a game, so graphics weren't the primary concern. So I'm just going to give those 2 out of 10. Sound is what you make of it, obviously. There are some tunes built into the application which are pretty decent, quite nice to listen to in the first place, but clearly the world is your oyster. If you're willing to put the time in, you can get whatever great sounds out of it you like. So I'm going to give the sound 8, based on the fact that someone who knows how to use it would get good sound out of it, effectively good tunes. And finally, playability doesn't really apply, so I use usability instead of playability for the final score here, even though it still says playability on the screen. It's quite hard to get into, as I said. It's quite inaccessible for a novice. It is a tool rather than a toy, as the instructions mention. Certainly moving around the screen and the different options using the cursor is hard work, and joystick support would have been preferable, I think, even though it's not a game. So yeah, getting used to all the keyboard commands is difficult, and it's quite hard work to build a tune up. One thing I do think it would really benefit would be some kind of sequence previewer or sequence creator external to the actual main tune creator, because at the moment, unless I've missed something, you have to actually create a sequence on the fly as you're creating the tracks, and that means to listen to it you've then got to play the whole song, which may well already have several sequences from the other tracks and so forth. So I think that's a bit of an oversight that would have made it easier for people building new SID tunes from scratch. So all that said, having got to grips with it, I think it's obviously a really powerful tool. There's a lot of functionality that I didn't even dig into, like the slide rule and the voice editor. The ability to play live to practice your tunes that you want to create is good as well. It is quite inaccessible for the novice, as I said, but once you get to grips with it, it's definitely a powerful tool, and I think definitely, as they said in the instructions, one of the best things in the class, certainly for the price that they were offering it at. So I'm going to give it a playability or usability score of 6 out of 10, all of which gives it an overall score of 6.3. Personally, I wouldn't have bought this back in the day, and I'm not really that interested in it now, although I did start to get more engrossed in it as I went along. But I'd say if you were looking for a tool to create your own SID tunes and export them to use in your own games or demos, or even just to play around with music making on the Commodore 64, this is a pretty powerful tool, and I think it's definitely worth the $2.99 asking price, even though it's not my kind of thing. So there you go, that sums up the review of Ubik's Music. If you've got any thoughts about the program, if you ever used it back in the day to make your own SID tunes, or you're thinking about trying it now for some reason, then let me know in the comments. And now let's head over to Brody and see what we get for the next game choice. Okay, so it's time for Brody to help me pick the next game to play, and the two options this time have got a water-based theme. So we've got River Raid and we've also got Turbo Boat Simulator. So we're going to stun those up, and then I will get the treats and place them around them like previously, and then we'll see what Brody picks for us. Okay, so the treats are set up, and this time, to slow him down a little bit, I've got an approach of several treats for him to pick up before he gets to the games. Don't know if that will make any difference or not, but we'll soon find out. Here we go again. In he comes. Both remain standing so far. Still got a couple to get. There we go. He's knocked one over, and he's knocked over Turbo Boat Simulator. Seems very decisive this time. He's definitely not even going to knock over River Raid. Obviously an Activision fan, I guess. There we go, he's off. So there we go. River Raid will be the next game that I play. I'll be playing that in the near future. Join me for that then, and thank you for watching this video. See you again soon.